So I'd like to begin this talk with a word of thanks for those who've organized this conference, to Alex, to Sheikh Alex, to those who funded it, to all of you who are here. There are many communities where topics like this don't matter and events like this don't happen. And kudos to you for making it happen, and to all those who are working here, in particular Ali Mehdi and others. You guys are doing a great job. So I want to offer a virtue ethics approach to one particular incident in the lives of the Imams that I think is illustrative of how we might consider the relationship between law, or what we call law, and what we call ethics, or maybe on another level what we call practical knowledge and divinely inspired wisdom. The account will be familiar to many of you if you know Shaykh al-Mufid's Kitab al-Irshad. That's what I'm drawing it from. And it's the account wherein the caliph al-Ma'mun responds to his family's protests against his plan to betroth his daughter to the very young and inexperienced 9th Imam Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Ali, or al-Imam al-Jawād salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The sources tell us the Imam was 9 years old at the time, 9 years and a few months. And in general, the caliph's Abbasid kinsmen expressed concern about Ma'mun's interest in forging ties between the 9th Imam and, as you know, before him, his father, Imam Reza, ties that would endanger their privileged position. Yet it is the issue of the 9th Imam's age that constitutes the family's key argument against the Imam's marriage to the princess al-Fadl, which they communicate using terms that I'd like to explore with you today. My interest in these terms, and the terms that are used, and in the response, and in what happens, and what ensues in the narrative, stems from my approach to the narrative itself through two lenses, through the dual lenses of virtue ethics and comparative mysticism. So, the caliph's family, the inner circle, the elite members of his family, they complained that the young boy, quote, even if his guidance impresses you, Ya Ma'mun, even if his guidance impresses you, is still a young boy. The young boy is just a young boy, right? He's a sabi. They continue, he has no cognizance. That's how I'm translating ma'rifah. He has no ma'rifah, cognizance, nor any understanding, fiqh. So give him some time to become educated, yata'addab, and acquire understanding in the religion, yatafaqqah fid din. Give him time. The caliph responds to them, woe unto you. I am more cognizant of this young man's abilities than you are. He is from the Ahlul Bayt. Their knowledge, and here knowledge is ilm, is from God, from divine subjects of knowing, and from God's inspiration, ilhamihi, ilham. The word is ilham. I'm going to keep coming back to these words. That's why I'm focusing on them right now. So the caliph asks his family, if you have doubts, test the child. They offer bringing in a third party, an expert, to ask Imam Jawad a question about the understanding of revealed commands, or what they call fiqh al-sharia. At this point, let me point out that structurally speaking, the format of this narrative is parallel to the incident between God and the angels in God's nomination of Adam as his vicegerent on earth. In that narrative, God also singles out someone for an exalted status, Adam in that case, a special place, and there ensues a protest, or at least an inquiry that has to do with a possible lack of suitability. Therein follows a testing from which the hero emerges triumphant, in both cases, on account of divinely granted knowledge. And I'll come back to this. The parallels between these two narratives, to me, hint at the sort of knowledge being highlighted in both narratives. So I'll come back to this by the end of the paper. The young Imam, by the way, he's addressed with the utmost respect throughout the narrative. The young Imam agrees to undertake the test. Nominated as examiner is a certain judge, the head judge of that day, Yahya ibn Aktham. And to explain what I mean by head judge, or judge of judges, qadi al-Jawād, it represents the further institutionalization of the office of judge in Muslim lands. So in the earlier period, before Harun al-Rashid, every town had its own qadi, had its own judge, and he would judge based on his own knowledge, but it became institutionalized after Harun al-Rashid, so that there was a head judge. And the head judge, the qadi al-Qudāt, was the judge of judges. So he would remove judges, he would determine the suitability of judges. That's going to matter to the narrative as well, that he's a judge of judges. That matters. So the judge is there to test the Imam. And he asks him a very simple question. What do you say, may I be sacrificed for you, regarding the one in pilgrim sanctity, the muhrim, who kills while hunting? That's his question to the Imam. Hunting, as we all know, is one of the actions forbidden to a pilgrim in a state of ihram. The Imam responds with a series of follow-up questions, and I'll read them. I'll quote them. Did the person in question kill the animal inside or outside of the sanctuary? Was the pilgrim aware of these restrictions at the time or unaware? Did he kill intentionally or unintentionally? Was this person free or enslaved, young or old? Was he killing for the first time or practiced in that action? Was the hunted animal a bird or something else? Was it a small animal that was hunted or a big one? Was he brazen in that action or repentant? Did the kill happen at night or in the day? Was the pilgrim in a state of sanctity for the lesser pilgrimage, the Umrah, or for the greater one, the Hajj? The judge at this stage cannot respond, and he begins to stutter. So dumbfounded is the judge that the entire congregation, and here I quote, attending the council realized what was the matter with him. The caliph then praises God and addresses his family members, once again paralleling what we find in the Quran regarding Adam. The caliph says, do you recognize now in him what you once denied? Following this is the marriage of the child Imam to the caliph's daughter, and that will serve as the conclusion to the story for us for now. This part, the part that I said, is what concerns us. So I want to shift gears a little bit. My present interest in this story stems from a problem raised in a well-known article by Julia Annis called Being Virtuous and Doing the Right Thing. Annis objects to the idea that ethics can provide us with a formalized way to determine right from wrong, what she calls decision procedures. In this formalized conception, ethics would be an almost technological enterprise, where a series of directives could determine what is moral or immoral in any particular situation. And if those of you who have taken courses in ethics at a university, this is not absurd. This is very common. Annis argues that this is not the case because the decisions we actually make are far too complex and specific to rely on such systems. The proposed decision procedure, ethical systems, might be compared to a computer manual, a technical sort of knowledge that directs any person to the right answer at any time. In fact, however, no one can put decision procedures into action consistently and avoid ethical failures. And the most famous example of this for virtue ethicists comes from Gertrude Elizabeth Margaret Anscombe, who famously refused to attend a convocation because of her protest of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Why? It's not just because they were so egregious. It's because the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki actually make sense according to utilitarian ethical decision procedural systems. If you were to make that decision using that system today, you'd come to the same conclusion. The right thing to do is to wipe out those cities. Her protest is not because of the event, it's because the way of thinking would lead to more events like this. So, to illustrate Anis's criticism of ethics as a technical variety of knowledge, Anis has us imagine a child. A child who can teach us how to use a computer. Or we can imagine a child who can teach us chess. Doesn't matter. Something technical. Could you ask that child a question that would require what we call wisdom? Would you ask that child to help you in your marriage? Would you ask that child to help you decide whether you should even do something small like euthanize your cat? Would you ask that child to help you make any decision that would involve a judge, what we would call judgment? A child with technical knowledge might be what we call an idiot savant, but he or she would remain what Anis calls a moral idiot. This is also true for people who are morally deplorable. Those we know to have very little ethical substance, but have mastered ethical theory. Would you feel comfortable, she says, relying on a horrible person, but who knows ethical theory well, because of their theoretical knowledge, to make a wise decision? Is the decision procedure, in other words, reliable enough that it simply does not matter who uses it? Or does it in fact matter? The reason that post-Enlightenment ethicists have offered such decision procedures at all, Anis argues, is that we want our ethics to be egalitarian, we want our ethics to be universal, we want a set of directives broadly applicable, determined by anyone, for such is what Enlightenment thinkers have argued is rational. And such is the basis of life in the modern state. You can't have a modern state without universal laws. How could you? Okay, so now let's apply all of this to the story of the Imam. The Imam's extraordinary ability might be read in two ways, at least two ways, many ways, but I'm going to focus on two possibilities. Here he stands before the caliph, the Abbasid elites, and the judge of judges, Ibn Aktham. One possibility is that the Imam provides them with a technical response, as one might expect from a detailed manual of fiqh, a detailed manual of jurisprudence, impressing them because he has asked an array of questions to extract a more precise answer. A person who has studied his or her fiqh well enough would appreciate that he's alluding to varied questions that exist about the matter of hunting while in pilgrim sanctity. But another possibility is that the Imam responds from a place of profound wisdom, so profound that even though he is merely a child, his wisdom qualifies him as something far beyond that. His response points not to a complex and technical knowledge, but rhetorically to a style of addressing such questions, a style that always caters to the specific circumstances of the questioner. A technical answer certainly would paint this 9-year-old Imam as the most knowledgeable person of his age, a genius in a way, because a child just shouldn't know so much, right? But if the Imam is using these questions to point to an awareness he always has, an awareness he draws upon when it is time to make judgments, then it would seem to address even more directly the concerns that the Abbasid elites had about his lack of ma'rifah, cognizance. That is, the Imam might be using these questions to point to the fact that his awareness reaches into particulars and responds to those particulars when making judgments. The way he approaches the judge's question differs greatly from the way the judge expects, hence the judge's dumbfounded inability to respond. The judge wanted a technical answer. He gave him a wisdom response. The word fiqh and the phrase fiqh al-sharia in this case would correspond to more original usages of the term, as discussed by Wa'il Halaq. Rather than referring to the developed Islamic sciences, they would refer to a more intuitive, personal, and small community model that required the ability to make manifest God's commands in one's judgments. What would be practiced before the institutionalization that I mentioned earlier in the paper. Then there is the word that Ma'mun uses to describe the Imam's knowledge, ilham, or inspiration. It signifies that the Ahlul Bayt's knowledge comes from God. But what does this mean? Does divine inspiration give a person a knowledge of the whole, from which they derive particulars? Or does God give a person knowledge of the particulars directly and in detail? I ask that question earnestly, knowing that there will be a number of you here in this audience with interesting responses. Let's talk about it. The Quranic model of the Prophet's revelation and reception of the Quran on one night, Laylatul Qadr, elaborated over 23 years, would seem to indicate that there is initially an undifferentiated whole. In the story of Adam, that I've said many times runs parallel to this account from Kitab al-Irshad, Adam receives the names from God. That source of his knowledge seems at first to be a plurality, al-asma', the names, plural. But if those names are the names of God, then they point to one unitary essence. And if they are the names of exalted beings, that is the Prophet and his family, again, they are united by the one light embodied in all of them. That is, models of God-granted knowledge seem to point to a unity realization that brings with it a plurality. And this would apply to ethical knowledge as well. Of course, this is not a new observation at all. It's been elaborated in detail by the philosopher Mullah Sadra, even if my applying it to this narrative is meant to start a new discussion. So here I'm going to quote from Mullah Sadra. This would have been something good to put on a slide. I apologize for that. I said no slides, but I should have had one slide. Okay. In discussing, so now I'm reading, this is Mullah Sadra. If there were a slide, this would be on the slide. In discussing the Prophet's knowledge, the only difference they draw, the people that he is criticizing, Mullah Sadra is criticizing, is that the Prophet imitates Gabriel while others imitate human beings. They do not realize that imitation is not a kind of knowledge. Then Mullah Sadra quotes the famous hadith, the true knowledge is a light that God shines on the heart of any servant. Mullah Sadra continues, they suppose that the Prophet learned the Quran by heart as other people do, and that the Imams and the awliya, peace be upon them, have learned these things by listening to the narrations of others. According to the verse that alludes to Khidr, وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا, and we taught him from nearness to us knowledge. God has emanated knowledge on their shining hearts because of a spiritual connection with what is hidden, and then it has come from their hearts onto their tongues, and from the hidden to the observable. This model of knowledge and the model of ethical decision-making resulting from that knowledge mirrors what Ibn Arabi described when he traced his knowledge to one incident, an unveiling that happened to him as a youth, which became elaborated for him throughout his life. It is the model of unveiling and witnessing, or kashf and mushahada, that I and others have discovered elsewhere. That's the model. I'm not saying it's the same thing. Lastly, it is the model of knowledge described by Al-Ghazali and others, Maulana Rumi refers to it too, in his story of the Chinese and Greek artists. The lesson of which is that knowledge is not an accumulation of forms of knowledge on the soul, rather it is the erasure of human qualities in the soul so that the soul can reflect the light of God. Do you know the story of the Chinese and the Greeks? I have extra time, so I'll tell it to you. Mashallah, this clock is great. So in the story of the Chinese and the Greeks, Ghazali says it, when Ghazali says it, the roles are different. When Maulana says it, the roles are different. And it might come from Ikhwan al-Safa, but I'll leave that to Dr. Zaidi to tell me. So the story is that there's a king who wants to decide who are the greatest artists in the land. And he has I don't know what you call it. Do you call it a sofa? He has like a hall like this, actually. He has a hall like this. And he tells the Byzantine, or we say Greek, the Rumi artists, you know, you have this wall to work on. Do your art there. And he tells the Chinese artists, you know, Chinese famous for their miniatures at that time, you have that wall. You do your work there. And then I won't let you see what the other side's doing. I'll put a screen between you. We'll see who the better artists are. Well, according to Ghazali, the Byzantines get very busy with their paints. They bring every color imaginable. But the Chinese, they don't do that. They bring cleaning materials. They start to scrub. The time is over now. The contest is done. And the king looks at the Byzantines' work and he says, mashallah, you know, this is wonderful. I can't imagine how this would be beat. And he looks at the Chinese and they seem to have done nothing but clean the wall. And they say, lift the screen. When they lift the screen, they realize that what the Chinese have made is a mirror. And the mirror, in reflecting what the Byzantines have done, is more luminescent, glittering, beautiful than what they created. What's the point? If you read in philosophy, they tell us that that to learn things is to accumulate forms of knowledge in the soul. Abu Hamid Ghazali is saying no. To learn things is to erase, subtract, remove from the soul human qualities, make it a mirror, and from that mirror you will reflect the one light of God that gives you true knowledge. Here let me clearly say and state without any ambiguity that I do not present any of this as a reconsideration of the way we talk about or think about or do Islamic law, not at all. Rather, I would like to consider what is meant by this narrative and the complexity to which the ninth Imam points. Is it meant that there should be a book or a number of books with multiple different scenarios answered therein, any possibility that might occur when a pilgrim in sanctity kills an animal? In other words, is the Imam advocating for a decision procedure that anyone could use with enough knowledge in a technical way, perhaps even an intelligent child? Or is the Imam saying that the wise judge would get to know the person, get to know the situation of the person, ask them these questions, and on a case-by-case basis every time determine what that person would need to do? Bear in mind that the Imam is speaking to the qadi al-Qudat, the judge of judges, someone who evaluates other judges. Obviously, jurisprudential wisdom can unite both of these possibilities. It might be that the Imam's wisdom becomes a model for the sciences that imitate that wisdom. The Quran seems to support this view, namely, that God grants a certain knowledge by which a pious person interacts with others, illuminating their manifold lives in the process. And here I quote chapter 6 of the Quran, verse 122. Is the person who was dead, so that we brought him to life, and made for him a light with which he walks among the people, like the one whose example is like remaining in shadows without being able to exit from them? That is how we have embellished for the truth coverers what they have been doing. This light, the light that the hadith describes as being cast into any heart that God desires, is on display in the Imam's response to Ibn Aktham, the judge. He walks with that light among people by showing them the effects of that light on the Imam's decision-making, so that it becomes for others what we would call moral reasoning. Certainly, jurisprudence, usul al-fiqh especially, is one of Islam's great contributions to global ethics. It has allowed the maintenance of a traditional way of life that has weathered changes that could have easily meant the abandonment of the Quranic way of life and the Sunnah. Yet the story of the ninth Imam as a wise child gives us a sense, when read the way I have suggested, that God's connection to us is not through laws that are elaborated on paper or a series of rulings that can be offered as a kind of procedure, something that is technical, but rather that God's connection to us is through people. And that those people are wise, that they have a light that God has given them. That light comes to be understood by others, imitated by others, so that it is formulated in a predictable and, one might say, rational way. Mullah Sadra would argue that through spiritual exertion and the elevation of our own immaterial dimensions, we can also enjoy glimmers of that light on our own. And here I conclude by saying that the narrative indicates that the Imam is a wise child. That's a paradox. Think about Julianus's article. He has gained through inspiration the wisdom that should take someone a lifetime, or at least till middle age. This would indicate that ethics itself, maybe all forms of moral knowledge, are subject to revelation and inspiration. All forms of moral knowledge are cases of divine circumvention. If this is the case, this model suggests that one can receive directly and perhaps all at once the experiences that one should acquire over a lifetime. This would render ethics a counterpart to inspiration. All of ethics is an imitation of the inspiration given by God to his friends. And I apologize for anything I might have said that was wrong, offensive, or anything like that. Thank you for listening. Salawat.